Hey everybody, it's EJ from EYEDESYN.com, and today I'm going to be talking all about the new volume modeling features added to Cinema 4D R20, and you're going to find out why this is such a game-changing feature and how it's going to change the way you work and how it's going to absolutely change what type of projects you go after in the future. Let's check it out. The new volume or VDB workflow is added to Cinema 4D R20. As far as my workflow, it's going to totally change the way that I work. And the most important thing, it's going to change the type of work that I attempt as well. The models I'm showing you right now are things that you can model very, very easily using the VDB, the volume modeling workflow. And it allows me to tackle models that I would have never attempted before. And I think this opens up a whole new world of client work for someone who might not be very comfortable modeling the traditional way like myself. So what I'm going to be doing is breaking down these few models, showing you how easy volume modeling is and how you can apply it to your workflow. And hopefully you'll see that this can totally revolutionize the way you work. All right, so let's start with modeling our cheese. And you can see I have the base cheese form that is just basically a cylinder, 3 rotation segments, and a little bit of fillet to round that out. But we want to actually have holes cut out in this little slice of cheese. And if you ask me how the heck you do that traditional modeling method wise, I would have no idea. I couldn't tell you. But with the volume modeling workflow, oh my goodness, so stinking easy. So we're going to go ahead and let's start by adding our volume builder. And this is what you're going to start out with to build out your volume. So it's aptly named. And how you build a volume from an object, like our primitive object here, is you just place it as a child of that volume builder object. So you're going to see a couple things. One, your object is going to be added to this object layer list. Now this layer list is very similar to Photoshop, where you can stack up and layer up a bunch of different primitive objects that help build up your volume form. So you're also going to see that your form or your object changed to a bunch of voxels or 3D pixels. And I like to consider them 3D pixels because if you look at the volume builder object here, you look at this voxel size, you can almost think of these voxel sizes as the pixel size. So if you have an image where the pixels are so large, like 8-bit, you're not going to get a lot of resolution or a lot of detail in that image. But same thing is with voxels. So the bigger the voxels, the less of that original detail of the cheese we're going to get. But if we put, say, a voxel size of 2, you're going to see that the voxels are so small and we're getting that definition, that resolution of our form again. Now, one thing I really like is, you can go a little bit willy-nilly with dragging this up and down. And I'm sure if you've worked with metaballs before, sometimes you'll put the value so low like this, and your computer will just be crunching forever. But luckily, Maxon, thank God Maxon did this, but they save yourself from yourself and give you this little error, or this little pop-up box that says, hey, that's probably not a good idea. So it can help save you from yourself. So I'll just hit cancel. I don't actually want to make it that small, but that's cool that that's there. Thank you, Maxon, from not crashing my computer. So here we go. We got our volume. Now we need to start cutting holes in our cheese, okay? I don't want to cut the cheese, we just want to cut holes through it. So we're going to go and we're just going to add some spheres that we can then add to this volume mesh. So what I'm going to do to add this new sphere to that volume is just simply click and drag it, make it a child of that volume builder, and you'll see that that sphere will now be added, and I can adjust this. These are all primitives, it's all live. And you can see that the voxels are now meshing these two objects together. What you're going to notice is our sphere looks kind of weird. You're going to see all of these facets. That's because what the volume builder is doing is actually looking at the polygons. And if I go to my display garage shading lines, you can see exactly where those lines are, or those edges are. But because we have this render perfect turned on, it's going to render perfectly smooth. But the volume builder checks out all those edges, and that's why you can see them there. And if you look at my little volume builder layer list here, so you can see my spheres added, I got my cheese, my cylinder, On each object, you'll get different options that'll show up. And for the sphere primitive, we have a different set of options from our cylinder. You'll see that we have this perfect primitive checkbox. And if we turn that on, watch what happens. That just smooths everything out. We no longer get those little segments there. So without that though, the segments is really what's going to be driving how smooth your object is. So luckily for a sphere, we don't need that, but for other primitives, you may need to up the segments to get it all smoothed out. So we'll turn on perfect primitive for that. We'll move this around, select the sphere first, and then move this around. And we'll just kind of position this where we want. Now, this is kind of just adding a pimple onto our cheese, and we do not want that. So we're going to go into our volume builder, and on our sphere we're going to see this mode drop down, and what we're going to do is use a boolean, just like we could subtract from like a spline mask. We have all these different modes here as well: union, subtract, intersection. For the volume builder, we're gonna have to subtract the sphere from the cheese to make that little cheesy hole right there. Okay, and what's great about this is, again, this is live. I have all my objects that are still primitive, and I can still adjust things, okay? So this is really great. We can use these Boolean operations to subtract objects from their objects, and you can see that we can easily add holes to our cheese. So now I can just start command click and dragging to duplicate the cheese, and just moving this, scaling this down, and that's going to automatically add that new sphere to our list and to our volume. But we're going to need to manually go to the subtract to subtract that, and check on that perfect primitive again to get rid of those little polygons that show up. So this is a little bit cumbersome, but one thing that's really nice is the organization features in the volume builders, or even in fields, is that we can start to add folders. So basically what I like to do is I'll just switch this back to union, and I'll create a new folder, and I'll double click on that folder and just have this named holes. And what I can do now is place these two spheres underneath that folder, and you'll see that the folder will actually have its own mode. And if we set the mode to subtract, it'll subtract these two spheres that are actually combined together under this union, and subtract that whole folder from the cheese. So this is a way easier way to start adding a bunch of little parts here, a little bit, all these little holes, adjusting this. And you'll see that if we go to our volume builder, we don't have to manually do the subtract. We can just add that to the folder, and it will automatically be subtract. Now we will have to manually check on that primitive, the perfect primitive, but you kind of get the point there. So what we can start doing is just start holing it up, blasting holes in this little cheese here. One thing that's kind of useful is, you'll see that I accidentally duplicated the wrong thing. There we go. We'll just add another sphere here. One thing that's nice to know is if you hit the Q shortcut key, it'll actually deactivate the volume builder. So Q will toggle that on and off. So if you needed to just see where your objects were, you can do that. Again, we'll just place this sphere, turn on the perfect primitive, put it in the holes folder, and it will be subtracted, and just start, adding all these little pieces. So we're going to do a little cooking show trick where I already have a holy cheese that I made already, so you don't have to see me kind of chucking all these cheese holes around. So now you can see we got our holy cheese, got a whole bunch of spheres here. Just placed a whole bunch of spheres in that little holes folder, and again just subtracted all of those from the main cylinder there, and we got this kind of shape. Now what we have right now is absolutely nothing when we go to render, because all we have right now are some voxels. Okay, so we're gonna make some geometry. We're gonna make a mesh based on this volume. We're gonna use the aptly named volume mesher, and how this works is you place the volume builder as a child of the volume mesher. Voila, we have some stinking geometry that we modeled using volumes, which is pretty incredible. We made that very, very quickly using the Boolean operation, subtracting a bunch of spheres, primitives. Everything's a primitive still, everything's still editable, and we have this little volume mesh. And again, even when we mesh it, we can still adjust things and move things around. Okay, so really, really massive workflow right here. So you're going to see that things are looking kind of cruddy around the edges here, okay? Because basically we're just meshing what we had before, and we're starting to see the crunchiness or the pixelated voxels we have here. So what we can do is use these really handy adjustment layers, basically. So we have what's called a smooth layer that whatever is underneath it, you can see that right now the only thing the smooth layer is doing is just smoothing the cylinder. But if I place the smooth layer on top, you'll see that it's not only smoothing the cheese, but it's smoothing the holes as well. So we're got rid of all those little, you know, pixelated edges, those little rough edges that we had before. If you can just check that on or off and see what's going on there when we deactivate that smooth layer. But basically what the smooth layer is doing is blurring out those voxels and blending them together. And you can see we have the overriding strength of our smooth layer here. We also have the voxel distance of like how much do we want this, basically this Gaussian blur to kind of span out there, okay? So we can adjust this however we want. We can make this voxel distance a little bit lower, but this is just massive. Like we can make this really nice organic shape using voxels, using smooth layers to smooth everything out, and this is looking a heck of a lot nicer than it was before that. Now there's another type of layer that we can use, and that's a reshape layer. And what a reshape layer allows you to do, if I just click on it here, is dilate or erode. You can see that as I bring the strength up and down. You can see that basically I'm just thickening this up. If I make the offset a -5, you can see that I'm actually eating in or eroding my cheese here, which I don't really want to do. But if you ever want to thicken up a mesh, this is a great way to do it. We also have this close and open, which is a different type of method for doing this. And you can see that I put in a too high of a value because, again, this is all based on, you know, the centimeter distance. So if it's a little bit too big, you can see what's going on. You can see this is a different type of offset and command than the dilate and erode if I just kind of switch back and forth there. So play around with those two different types. Again, we can go into the negative values as well. You can see that the volume builder is kind of calculating down here, chugging away on my trash can Mac here. But you can see that the close opened is kind of eating away and making this cheese look kind of melty versus the dilate and erode. So you can definitely tell the difference between these two operations. Maybe we'll say we'll thicken it, you know, 0.5 amount, just to make it a little bit thicker and looking good. Now, a lot of what this looks like right now is also going to be based on this voxel size. So you can see if my size is too high, again, we're losing that definition. And then once we smooth out those bigger voxels, it just turns to mush. So again, the resolution is going to be very important. I'm just going to do like 1.5 to get those nice smooth edges back. We can even see what 1 centimeter looks like as well to really sharpen that up. But I think 1.5 looks really good. And we can, you know, we're moving and grooving around this scene, and you can see what our mesh actually looks like. If I just undo that move, you can see that it's actually a pretty clean mesh. We have quads everywhere, okay? So this is really, really clean mesh. Again, if I crank this all the way up, you can see that it's still maintaining a pretty decent mesh there. So really clean geometry from this volume builder. So we got our reshape, we got our smooth layer again. It's really, really huge to help us out there. One thing we can do is start to add, because this is a little bit too perfect, I would say, is we can go ahead and maybe add some displacers. So I'll go and add a displacer. I'll maybe add it to, let's just go ahead, place the displacer underneath the volume builder, and let's just group all of these spheres together. So I'll group the objects. Now notice what happens when I group that under a null. You are going to see that my null replaced all of those spheres that were under my holes folder. So I'll need to just drag and drop this holes underneath there and just make sure that that null, which I'll name just, you know, holes, and have that under there. Now I can add this displacer, load up some noise, and Maybe scale this noise up a little bit. So basically we're adding a little bit more organicness. The spheres were a little bit too perfect, but now we have these different shapes and sizes and looking really good. We can also, we can go and add the displacer, just command click and drag, and just have it displace the actual cheese geometry here. And we'll have a little bit more of organic look to our cheese as well, the little cylinder there. So maybe we crank this up to 500. Maybe we change the seed here a little bit too. So, those displacers actually added quite a bit. This is a little bit too perfect. We have the volume modeling making it look really nice and organic, and we have the displacers. And again, everything is still live. Everything is still editable. Now, one last thing I want to cover about just the volume mesher. There's a couple options here that are really useful. The voxel range here. And what this is doing is kind of like the dilate erode layer. What this is doing is either using the outside of your voxel or the inside of your voxel in order to create that mesh. Hovering around the 50% range and maybe just crank this up a little bit to like 70, we can actually thicken up our model this way or maybe shrink it down, go in the negative way. But you can see once we go to like 0 and go to the extremes, it doesn't look so hot, right? Another thing is if you have a lot, if you have a really big mesh, using this adaptive basically helps pare down your scene. If I go to my garage shading lines, to make this nice and swift in your viewport, and then when you go to render, just crank down that adaptive. So basically that's just an adaptive level of how much definition, how many polygons are in your viewport. Just a nice little workflow enhancer there. You can see as I brought that back up, we just need the the volume builder, the volume mesher to do its thing and calculate, and then we're moving and grooving. So one other thing with texturing is you just apply the cheese or your texture to that volume mesher. Say you're done with this and you want to start doing other things with it, we can just right click, current state to object like we would any other kind of object. And here's our actual polygon object. So super easy workflow. Another thing I like to do as well is maybe add a smoothing deformer, add that as a child of the mesher. And this is another way to kind of smooth things out a little bit as well, okay? So let's go ahead onto another example. And we're gonna go and do some fruit this time, get a raspberry. So now that you have a pretty good understanding of at least the basics of volume modeling, and it's such an easy workflow, I just wanna show you how I built up this raspberry model very easily. So I started out with a simple capsule, subdivided very low, added a taper, and a twist, okay? And then what I ended up doing was just cloning some spheres onto that capsule, cloning them onto the capsule's vertices, okay? So we basically have what the beginning shape of a raspberry is with just a bunch of spheres. I also used a plane effector to kind of beef up the center spheres here. You can see what is going on with that plane effector with the box field. And then basically, once you go and volume build that, you have a little smooth layer blurring all that out and combining all of those little spheres together, and turned on the volume mesher, okay? And you can see what my whole system here looks like. So I have my perfect primitive, turn those on, looking really nice. We just have those set to union. We just drag and dropped our cloner object in there, which is huge that you can bring in a whole cloner and it'll recognize all of the spheres underneath. I also have these spheres on the top and bottom just to close those little holes there. Okay, so just really awesome stuff. You can see we have these weird kind of, if I turn off the mesher, you can see all the little voxels here kind of building up and making these pixelated type of things right here, which look really odd, especially right in here. You can really get a sense of those little voxels. So again, we can go and use a smoothing deformer. Again, make it a child of that mesher. Voila, totally gets rid of all that. We can adjust the iterations. You can see how that looks before and after. We no longer get that sense of all those little pixel, little weird circular looking things. Hopefully you can see we just got rid of those with a smoothing deformer. And how this is different from, say, like the smooth layer is the smooth layer is smoothing out those voxels. The smoothing deformer is smoothing out the actual geometry. So that's how we can get this extra smoothness from the smoothing deformer. And again, this all started from a capsule, cloned some spheres onto it, and there's no freaking way I'd ever be able to model this traditionally, okay? I just would not be able to do that. But let's go ahead and just show you how I made the leaves of this little guy too, the little raspberry. So let me just go ahead and show you how I did that. And let's just break down what I did with this leaf. So this leaf is just a spline, okay? And I extruded it. There we go. We just extruded it out 20 centimeters and then subdivided it with a regular grid to add more subdivisions here. And that was for me to be able to do some FFD deformation modeling here, to be able to just adjust all that stuff, maybe make it bend like a nice little leaf. And now we can just, you know, take this simple extrude object, and this doesn't look very organic-y at all, okay? But the great part about the volume modeling, it just makes something like this look so nice and organic. Again, we're going to place all of the objects, including the null, underneath this volume builder. Bring the voxel size down to, say, you know, 3, and maybe add a nice little smoothing layer here. Maybe adjust the strength. So already we have a really nice organic kind of shape here that is just looking really, really good. So let's go and just add our volume mesher. Just place the builder under the mesher, go out of our garage lines, and you can see we got this really nice leaf made organically with just a simple extrude object. I mean, this is pretty crazy. Like, it was that easy to do this. One thing that's really nice, if I add a reshape layer, again, we're thickening up the whole entire mesh. The great thing about all of either the smooth layers and the reshape layer is that we can actually use fields or fall-offs to control where that thickening is going on. So say if we wanted the leaf to be a little bit thicker in the middle and taper off at the top, well, we can go ahead and add a, say, like a box field. And everything inside this box will have that reshape layer, okay? So we just got to make sure it's big enough here. And let's just make sure, again, order means a lot here. So if we're reshaping and then smoothing, we're not going to be able to smooth out the weirdness that's actually happening from our reshape layer. So we need to make sure that our smooth layer is happening first, then our reshape, and there you go. Now we can see that we have this nice thickening part of our leaf just by this nice little box field here. So really, really cool stuff to be able to, you know, control where the thickening part of your object is. And again, we're getting some weird stuff, these weird circular kind of things. So again, go and just grab a little smoothing, smooth it on out, smooth, nice and smooth now. Okay, using that smoothing deformer. So really cool stuff, and that's how I made the nice little leaves on my object. Again, just started from a basic, really crappy looking extrude object and turned it into a nice little leaf. Okay, so that is the freaking power. Again, all editable or all live, so I can still edit all of my stuff here, all procedural. This is why I'm so obsessed with this. Like, this is gonna allow me to make so many things that I wouldn't never have dreamed of modeling before. Okay. All right, on to our last project here. Boom, Roman column again. There, no way I'm actually modeling this in real life without volume modeling. Something I would never model on my own. I would buy a TurboSquid model or something like that. But I made this in a little bit less than an hour using volume modeling. So I just want to demonstrate that you can use all type of objects to build up a volume. For example, I have this little example off to the side of how I made this little ionic little curl here. You can see that basically this is comprised of a little sweep object. If I turn that on and off, you can see I have my little helix here that I just drew. Just swept a circle around it. Added these little curl elements as well. These are just little splines. And if I throw this in the volume builder, boom, we just meshed that all up. And one thing that's really awesome is I have these curls in their own folder. And what this allows you to do is if you have an object like these little curl elements right here, if I just select one, you can see what I'm talking about here. We can throw them in a folder and be able to add a smoothing layer that just affects the objects in that folder. So we can smooth these little curls out, or a road or anything like that, and kind of grow this out without affecting the other objects in our little layer system here. So here's my little helix as well. And you can see that basically what I did was I have my helix, my copy of that object, and I just pressed it right up against, kind of scaled it down a little bit. And what I did was use this spline to kind of just cut out and subtract that object to get this nice little indent here. And again, I can go grab my helix again, just pull this out, and you can see exactly what's going on to make this really nice indent. Now, how splines are handled with the volume builder, again, I showed you that some of these objects have different properties than others. When you select a spline and drag it into your volume builder, add it to your volume builder, we have this radius, and we also have, let me just turn all this other stuff off. So here you see we have our just our helix by itself, okay, right there. And we have the radius, which is just the size of the growth or the volume that is deriving from that helix. So it's almost like you're sweeping a sphere along this or something like that. So what you can see, if I bring this density low enough, that what this mesh is actually made out of are little tiny spheres, kind of like a metaball, where if you increase the density of it, meshes all that together to create a continuous form. So these two options are only available on a spline to be able to mesh a spline shape. So that's exactly what I did with these little curls as well. So again, we can adjust the distance here, or the radius, and also adjust the density, and see they're just made up of some spheres there. So a lot of possible things here, using splines to be able to help you build out something like this whole object here, okay? So I use splines for, if I turn this on, turn on the mesher, just got a lot of stuff going on here. Again, if there's enough people out there that actually want to see me build this from scratch, maybe I'll do a tutorial just on this, but just a lot of primitive objects to build this up. And that's kind of the great part of this workflow, is you can model something based on just the forms that shape this kind of object, okay? So and again, this is kind of slow. As I kind of adjust things, you're gonna see how this kind of slows down. Got the volume builder, but it's cranking away, and once it calculates, we can move and groove around here really, really quickly. So again, I just subtracted a whole bunch of capsules from this main cylinder to create the little indents. Again, this is absolutely something I would never try or attempt to model at all. These little divots, I just cloned some cylinders. If I hit the Q key to turn this off, turn off the volume builder, you can see exactly what all the objects look like that made this all up. Got a few splines. There's our capsules. So you can get pretty crazy with all of this. And the one thing that is actually really cool is you can actually use fields in noise fields and use them to subtract from some layers, okay? So I have this main column base here, and what I can do is activate that random field, and that's basically just gonna apply some random noise. And because this is set to subtract, it's gonna subtract from my volume. Now it's calculating down here in the lower left. So we're just using some 3D noise. So check that out. How cool is that? So basically the 3D noise is acting as a matte. Whatever is that lighter yellow color is going to eat away from our voxels and therefore our geometry and create some deterioration to just the base of our column. Now we can see that this main column is in its own folder, so only the random field is affecting that. But if I take this out from that folder and subtract it from everything, we can see exactly what that looks like too. So there you go. We have some nice little decay, little chunks of marble that fell off from the top of our Roman column as well. So this is just so cool. Again, if you actually animated something like this, so maybe you wanted to animate the random field, maybe the inner offset of this thing kind of crumbling or something like that, you could bake out animated volumes by just right-clicking, and they added this new bake as Alembic, and it'll actually save out your volume, save it as a Alembic file that you can use, you know, elsewhere. And doing it this way, exporting this Alembic, actually saves out all the animation. So if you have animated voxels, say you had that noise animating, this will then export this out, bake it, and you no longer have to have that volume mesh you're calculating all the time. And especially when you have something as dense as the object I have right now, once you get it to a point where you're like, yes, this looks good, and you have this and add this into another scene or something like that, you're going to want to bake out that volume mesher. So this is exporting as our Alembic file. Now that that's baked out, you can see we have this whole Alembic file in here, this Alembic object, and you can see the actual path of that Alembic file that we had saved. So it actually saves it out in a folder wherever your project file was, and you can then go ahead and let me just open up a new project, and we can go ahead and just open that up and just hit OK, and it'll just import that volume mesher, and we can easily manipulate this inside a different project. So this is great when you have a mesh, you want to bake it out and use it in a larger scene. So really awesome stuff. So yeah, there's absolutely no way I'd ever be able to model that or anything I showed in this video from scratch. And I hope that kind of gives you an idea of just how massive this whole volume workflow that has been added to R20, how big a deal that is. I mean, I'm just thinking of, there's so many instances of when I wanted to work on a client project, but I kind of shied away, or I wanted to do something for a project, but that barrier of me not being a very good modeler always got in the way. And you'd always try a shortcut, or you ditch an idea. And I just think this is such a whole huge thing that's gonna allow you to unleash your creativity. And if you're an artist and a creative, it just allows you to create art without having that barrier of like, I want to do this, I want to make this thing, but I just have no idea how to. Volume modeling, if you just get the basic shapes, and if you're good at design, you are good with your basic forms and stuff like that, this volume workflow, this volume modeling workflow is absolutely huge. So again, this is just kind of scraping the surface of what's possible with volume modeling. I didn't even do any animation with it. So if there's anything in this tutorial that like modeling wise that you want to see me do a standalone tutorial for, let me know in the comments section below. And if you have any questions about volume modeling or anything like that, also leave them in the comments section below. This is an area where I'm super pumped to get more into it. So any questions, any tutorial suggestions that you want to see me do, I'm all ears. So let me know. So thank you guys so much. If you like this video, please be sure to like it. If you like what I'm doing here on the channel, please subscribe. And as always, especially with this volume modeling stuff, if you make stuff, I want to see what you guys are making and unleashing your creativity with all this volume modeling stuff. So be sure to share it with me on Twitter, on Facebook, all that stuff. Can't wait to see what you guys come up with. And again, huge thanks to all of you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.